And one of the most recent trips he's taken, if anyone has seen the newsletter that went out from the community, is he went to France, right?
That is correct.
And he did a tour, and a Mi'kmaq flag is planted in front of a cemetery. I'm not quite sure where, because I didn't read the whole thing, so my apologies. And he has a beaded poppy pin that was also donated. And I believe it was Jerry, Alistair, and William that had given some things to be planted in front of the cemetery. So I asked Tom to come in to talk about the soldiers that were part of our history and our community and our families. And I met Tom through my dad when he was doing research on the history of Gesgapegiag last summer at the church. And I found that what he was talking about was quite interesting, because there's a piece of our history that's really missing. And what better way to share it than with you as students, because we have the history programs here, we have the culture, and we have the language, and we're really trying to strengthen your identity as Mi'kmaq community members. So he's brought in Al, which is weird for me to say, but my dad, to come in because he has some things to say, and then he has his friend Mark Sear here. And thank you, Mr. Jerry Martin behind the cameras, and Alex from the band. Thank you, Alex Jerome, for also being here. And thank you guys for participating, and Mr. Walter from the tourism sector. So without further ado, I'm going to allow Tom to share his experience, his stories, and his life. And if you don't want to be recorded, don't walk in front of the camera to get the fruit. That's purposely why I put it there. But we have some fruits. So thank you for coming in.
A little bit.
Go first.
Okay. Over somewhere else.
The presentation today that he's going to be talking about is very important, and why I say it's important. When I was doing research for the museum, in all my wildest dreams as a kid, I never knew there was one guy that was so brave and became so famous, and he's from Gesgapegiag. I heard that, I used to hear that name, I don't know how many times when I was growing up, and I never thought about it. But then when the research started, and then when I got a hold of Tom, we're talking about that, I was so impressed with the Narcisse Jerome. Nobody knows him around here. Then there's Bernard Kondo, which I'm related to. That was Albert Kondo's brother. And there's John Fickier. So he's going to give you all the facts and information, and it's really interesting because nobody ever talked about the Mi'kmaq veterans. They were just veterans. But when you go back to history, how they got, when they got shot, they got killed, that's a big thing for Gesgapegiag, because we sent people there to fight for freedom. And some of them came back, some of them lost their lives. So I'm going to let Tom take over, because he's got a whole lot of information to do. So take it away, Tom.
Thank you, Alistair. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. It's a great honor for me. This whole thing I'll try to keep it under an hour or so. If anybody needs to leave to go to the washroom, no problem, just go ahead. And if there are any questions along the way, just raise your hand, get my attention somehow, and we'll stop. I'll stop and see if I can answer those questions. I'll start off by introducing myself. My name is Tom Eaton. I'm originally from Gaspé, and when I was 18 years old, I joined the Army myself. So I'm technically considered a veteran, but nothing compared to the guys that we're gonna be hearing about here in a minute. I'd be the young fellow that was standing on the left. This was taken in Germany in 1984-ish, a few years ago. Way back when Alistair was a young man. I served in Kingston, Ontario, Masset, British Columbia, Alert, Nunavut, Germany. Did a bunch of exercises in places like Petawawa, Gagetown, Lockhart-Cheek, things like that. A few pictures on the young fella here at the front, right there.
Oh, yeah.
That's me.
Oh.
But I've always had an interest in military history, even before when I joined. I grew up sort of, my heroes were soldiers, and this is the cenotaph in Gaspé. And so the main picture in the middle is the cenotaph in Gaspé, and the pictures on either side are the list of names, pardon me, of all the guys from Gaspé who were killed in the First World War. And I actually tracked them all down and visited every one of those individual graves in France, and these guys particularly France, Belgium, and England. So military history is a big thing for me. This is La Chaudière Military Cemetery in Vimy. That's where Eric Eden, who's one of my ancestors, he was killed at Vimy Ridge. That's where he's buried. So that's a little bit of the background of why I'm interested in military history. I've done over the years a bunch of different presentations all over the place. Jerry, who's at the back there, has attended a couple of them. So 2 years ago, I was speaking with William Jerome. I was working at the military museum in Richmond, and William is interested in military history as well. And he told me that the cenotaph here in the community had a list of names on it, so I went over, took a picture, and you'll notice that there's two categories, or two time frames on there. The first group was 1914 to 1918, and the second group was 1935 to 1945. 1914 to 1918 is the period that we'll be talking about today. That's the First World War. And what I did is I took each one of those individual names and started researching on them, and you'll see as we move along why that list of names is so special. There's a better shot there. And Alex, this is your, Alex Jerome Sr. is your great grandfather.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. So we'll be covering the stories of some of these guys, and you'll see that it's a pretty fascinating story if you're at all interested in either Mi'kmaq history or Mi'kmaq history generally, or military history. A fascinating story. All right, so this is the National War Memorial in Ottawa. And just some quick statistics. I have to read them off because I don't remember them all off the top of my head. In August of 1914, by the way, I'm going to be doing this story, I'm going to be telling a story chronologically. So I'm going to start in August of 1914 and work our way down. So you'll see that there's a lot of times where we're jumping back and forth between Europe and Gesgapegiag, Listagouche, etc. But I'm trying to keep it going chronologically. So, August 4th, 1914, Canada declares war on Germany. October 3rd, 1914, the first Canadian contingent left Gaspé. Now, that first Canadian contingent that left was made up mostly of people who were already in the military. We hadn't really started any recruiting yet. So it was people who, mostly from big cities, Montreal, Toronto, etc. So not a whole lot of recruiting going on yet on the Gaspé coast at this point. They left, like I said, October 3rd, 1914, they left Gaspé. You'll see a picture here in a second. They arrived in England 11 days later, so it's an 11-day trip to get across the Atlantic Ocean. So it just gives us an idea of how things were. This is 105 years ago. So things were quite a bit different. There was a total of 425,000 Canadians served overseas. There's no real good number, how many of that, what percentage or how many of those were First Nations. There's not really a precise way to tell that. Of the 425,000 that served overseas, 173,000 were wounded. That's a pretty high percentage, just that there. And 61,000 of them were killed. And we have to remember too that Canada back then had a population of only 8 million people. So Those pretty high numbers for a small, relatively small population. This is a picture of the ships leaving the port of Gaspé in October of 1914. There you go, a little map of the Atlantic Ocean. They arrived in Plymouth, England. Then they were the first contingent, and then they were taken by train all across England, and they spent the winter of 1914 training. Then they went from England over to France, Saint-Nazaire, France, to Bretagne again, and then eventually they headed to a town called Ypres. That's pronounced Ypres, Y-P-R-E-S, Ypres. Anybody who's going to be interested in the First World War, that's a name that you're going to hear over and over and over again. We've all heard of Flanders Fields, the poem Flanders Fields. Ypres is the capital city, I guess, of that Flanders. We'll talk about that more later. Now, very quickly when they arrived there, the first contingent, now remember what I said, the first contingent is nobody really from the Gaspé coast yet. It's all people from bigger cities, people who are already in the army. But rather quickly, they end up right in the middle of a battle in April of 1915, April 1915. A new weapon is introduced, something that hadn't been used yet, gas. And it came to be sort of one of the symbols of the First World War, one of the symbols of the horror of the First World War was use of gas. That would choke you and cause blistering on your skin. It was just a horrible, horrible situation. So in April of 1915, the Canadians are hit with gas. The Germans gas the Canadians. And this is one of the monuments. This is a monument at the location where this happened. Saint-Julien, Belgium. 2,000 soldiers were killed from April 22nd to April 24th, 1915. Most of them, the vast majority of them, the effects of gas. Locally in Belgium, around the surrounding area, they just call that statue, they call him the Canadian, is how they refer to it locally as a landmark. Not too far from the Canadian is a place called Essex Farm. Essex Farm is important because it was a medical bunker. Those you could see sort of the whoops.
Yeah.
See in there the entrances there? Those underground bunkers. Those were operating rooms for the wounded soldiers. And one of the surgeons that was there was a fellow by the name of John McCrae. John McCrae is the fellow who wrote In Flanders Fields. So fairly quickly into the Canadians fighting, I guess, or involvement in the First World War, John McCrae wrote the poem In Flanders Fields. There's a picture of him now. And of course, one of the results of the popularity of the poem In Flanders Fields is the development of the poppy as sort of a symbol. So that's where the use of the poppy as a symbol of remembrance began. Meanwhile, in Canada, a young fellow by the name of John Vicaire. He's actually from Listigouche, but I talk about him because he's related to a lot of people from here, notably William Jerome.
Yeah.
He's William Jerome's uncle. John Vicaire has the distinction of being the first First Nations soldier on the Gaspé coast to volunteer during the First World War. And he signed up in June of 1915, so shortly after, not June, February of 1915. And he was just, it's difficult to say how old he was because in some documents, in other documents he's 20, but let's just say that he was either a teenager or in his early 20s. It's kind of tough to say, but definitely a young man, no doubt about that. And he, like I said, he has the distinction of being the first First Nations soldier on the Gaspé coast to volunteer in the First World War. It's a lot of firsts in that sentence. So he crossed, what's the date there? He crossed June. Oh, you don't have your glasses. June of 1915. Young John Vicaire leaves St. John, New Brunswick aboard that ship, the Caledonia, and heads over to England. And while he's doing that, the first soldier from Gesgapegiag to volunteer, Barney Kondo, volunteers. Barney Kondo was 22 when he volunteered in June of 1915. Barney Kondo was related to Jerry, related to Alistair, and if we do a little bit of genealogy work, I think we'll find that he's probably related to a few of us here in the room today. So Barney Kondo. There's the only picture I've ever seen of Barney Kondo. It's a young fellow. Like I say, he was 22. And this, I'm assuming this picture was taken before he joined the military. You know? So you know, he's either 22 or younger when this picture was taken. And he left in October of 1915. He left from Montreal aboard that ship, the SS Corsica. And okay, so that's just, I got the notes here because for the dates, because I can't see the dates here. So John Vicaire arrives at the front on November 13th, 1915. John Vicaire. So he's that much ahead of Barney Kondo. Barney Kondo is just leaving, and John Vicaire is already heading for the front. As we'll see, it won't be a very long and he ends up at a place called Galgoasiet, France, right there, which is just by car, maybe 20 minutes near Ypres, the city that I was mentioning earlier. And he finds himself in the thick of things really quick. This is Galgoasiet. I took this picture in November, so it's what Galgoasiet looks like today. But when John Vicaire went through there, remember, he's just a kid at this point. He's just sort of like, try to look at it through his eyes, how this would have been. Like totally mind-blowing. This is what it looked like when he arrived there in November, in the fall of 1915. Yeah. This is the Galgoasiet Military Cemetery in Galgoasiet, France. John Vicaire was killed in action on December 30th, 1915. Gunshot wounds to the chest and the wrists. So, something like this. Like that. And just a kid. And this is his gravesite. You'll notice the two flags. That one's courtesy of Alistair. You'll also see the beaded poppy from here. Those were all left there. And that's the flag.
That's the pop that was made by Marilyn. That's your grandmother, right? Yeah, Alex, grandmother.
Yeah. So it was a kind of my way of bringing a little bit of the community here to there, and also sage, which my kneed up Jerry. So that's John Vicaire. So he has, we can tell, his war didn't last very long. He arrived in the front, and he was only on the front for about 6 weeks total. Poor young fellow. And you'll notice here that it says that he's 18. So some places in his file it says he's 20. Some places it says he's 18. So that'll remain a mystery, I guess. And he's William Jerome's uncle. So now we're skipping back here. March of 1916, Alexander Jerome. This would be Alexander Jerome Senior. He joins. He volunteers as well. He was just a young fellow too. How old was he? He was only 19 when he volunteered, which makes him the second person from community here to volunteer to go overseas.
Now, Dad, correct me if I'm wrong, his name wasn't Alex Senior, it was just because there was always Alec Cheech and Alex? Was that the reason why there's Alex Senior and
No,
Alex
they
Junior?
weren't related, but that's how it was.
Yeah.
It's like somebody had like
The same name?
same names.
But they weren't
Call
related.
you Junior.
No,
Okay, I've been
That's my
operating.
grandfather.
I've been
Yeah.
operating under the assumption that, I've been operating under the assumption that Alexander Junior was Alexander Senior's son.
No.
You're saying it's not?
No, it was just because they were two with the same
Yeah.
name, and one, they just needed to differentiate, one was
Yeah.
older.
There you go. Okay, cool. So there you go. He was only Alexander Jerome. We'll call him Alexander Jerome the Elder. He joins. He's only 19 when he
Oh,
joins.
yes. His nickname on reserve was Moji. I don't know what it means, but that was his nickname. But they used to call him Alec Ouch, because every time he got up, everything hurt, so after that they just called him Alec Ouch.
April 1916. So we're going chronologically here. April 1916. We jump back to Barney. Barney Gondo. He leaves England for France. He heads for the front, and you'll see with Barney things got real interesting real fast for Barney as well. He heads to eventually he heads to Belgium, Ypres, Belgium, with the 58th Battalion. You don't need to remember all this. And Ypres, it's not a very good map there. But that whole area, that whole pink area, that during the First World War, that was the middle of ground zero, if you will, for lack of a better term. That's where all of the stuff was happening in 1915, 1916. So he heads there, Barney. This is Ypres today. It's a beautiful, beautiful town. This building houses what's called in Flanders Fields Museum. But the original building was built in the 1600s, and it's a factory where they make cloth. So the inside of that building is just gigantic, long halls. There's hardly any rooms inside that thing. It's just a huge place where they made these big rolls of cloth, called the Cloth Hall. This is what Ypres looked like when Barney Gondo arrived there. Totally different. So look at that's the same building. That's the building today. That's what it looked like in 1916. Ypres. And those are Canadian soldiers marching towards the front. So this is Ypres seen from a distance. And we're looking at Ypres right now. You see the spires in the back there? That's Ypres. And we're about, it's kind of tricky there with the lens of it. It's a good 5 or 6 kilometers away. And we're standing at the position where the Germans are. So this is the front. Essentially, all of that there would have been where the trenches were. Right there, our trenches, Canadian trenches. And the Germans are standing, well, where we are. So we're looking at this from the German point of view. And the Germans are shelling the city.
Yeah.
Hence the destruction that we saw in the other picture. So that's where that destruction came from. This is where I'm going to need my notes. I want to make sure that I give you the right caliber. So some of the weapons that are being fired into the city of Ypres. There's this one that's a 5.9 caliber howitzer, and that fired high explosive shells. And the shell that comes out of that's about that big around, but it's high explosive. That's one of the things that's coming at them. So it's not. You can see it's not a very friendly environment. This is a 77 millimeter field gun. Those of you who are familiar with the Military Museum in Richmond, you see that there's a gun out in the front there. That's what that is. So, this is again the destruction. This is the destruction that was caused by black. So the idea was, they lined up the Canadians. The idea was to take out the German gun position. You have to remember, back then there was no such thing as planes were just starting off. So it had to be done by infantry. So essentially, it was pretty basic and brutal tactics. They put the soldiers up on the line in the trench, and somebody blew a whistle, and everybody come out of the trench. It wasn't pretty. And so now we're looking at it from the standpoint of Barney Gondo. This is what Barney Gondo's point of view would have been. So in the back, that's where the German guns were. And behind us is where the city of Ypres is.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Did they turn that into farming land?
Yes, slowly but surely though. It took a long time, and still today they keep finding unexploded shells.
Yeah.
So the Belgian government has an explosive technician team there on standby. Like when you drive in the countryside, farmers at the front of their driveways have these big metal cages. And if they find a shell or whatever, it's because they're so used to it. They see so many. They just put the shell in there, and a guy goes by, just like they pick up garbage or recycling can, and they have yeah. I know. Like if I was to find the shell, I'd be, but they're used to it, and they know what's sort of dangerous. They can tell the difference between something that's likely to explode now and something that's it's not that urgent to deal with. So it's kind of different. Anyway, yeah. So Barney Kondo and the 58th Battalion, they're looking up the hill, and their job is to take out the German guns that are at the top of the hill. No small task. So for those of you who like maps, see these two little blue X's there? The two little crosses? That's be where the guns are. Back here, SP-17 to SP-16, in there is where Barney Kondo and his battalion is. A battalion is about 1,000 people. So he's one of a group of 1,000. And here there's an area called Maple Copse. Copse is a word that means a group of trees. Who knew? I didn't know. I had to look that up. So Maple Copse, so it's a group of maple trees. Fittingly, we're Canadians. And this is some other stuff that, because the closer they get to the guns, the stuff that's coming at them changes. So in the town of Deep, you've got those high-powered field guns that are firing into the city. But the closer you get to the guns, then those guns are being defended by German infantry. And these are some of the things that some of the weapons that the Germans are using against Barney Kondo and his comrades specifically. So at the top, this thing, that was what a German grenade looked like 100 years ago. The Canadian soldiers called it a potato masher. And essentially how that worked was on the butt end of it, right there, is a screw cap. You unscrew it and you pull it, there's a wire that breaks, and then you've got, I don't know how many seconds there to throw it. And you throw it like that. The machine gun that's there is, I just want to make sure I have the caliber right, 7.92 millimeter. So it's bigger than the 308. 450 rounds a minute, that thing. Yeah. So that's coming, and that'll come back into the story a little later. And this thing here is a mortar, and that's what's the caliber? 3-inch mortar. So round coming out of the end of that, about that big. And the way a mortar works is you drop the round into it, and it goes down, and it fires back out. And that's good for attacking enemy trenches, good or bad, depending on which end of it you are. So here are some of the, and the reason why, one of the things when you start researching these, getting into military history, you learn about war diaries. The Army's pretty good at writing everything down, and it provides us a record of what happened. So to give you an example, just a little example of the stuff that Barney had to live through there. On May 24th, Barney's in the trenches. May 24th, 1916. Barney's in the trenches. At 3:16, they get the orders to put on their gas masks. At 3:16 in the morning, and they're being shelled with 5.9 high explosives. So the other field guns are being shelled with those, and their gas masks stay on from 3 o'clock in the morning on the 24th of May till 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the 25th, with the gas mask on. And not just the gas mask; they're being shelled and shot at and everything else. And then the gas masks come off, then the heavy shelling starts again, the gas masks go back on, and so on and so on and so forth. It's just that kind of a cycle. So he's going through that. In total, between May 25th and June 8th, that's a little over, almost 2 weeks, 2,000 Canadians were killed in that spot that I just showed you. And Barney Kondo was there. This is the Maple Cop Cemetery, but Barney Kondo survives this. Survives it, but not without some difficulty. On May 27th, remember when I was talking about the days when the masks were on and off. On May 27th, Barney suffers a gunshot wound to the left foot and a shrapnel wound to the face. Shrapnel is basically when a shell explodes, all the little pieces of metal. Those little pieces of metal are called shrapnel. So he gets a gunshot wound to the left foot, a shrapnel wound to the face. That's his personal record. He only spent 6 weeks in the hospital before he was sent right back to the front. So,
You said those